What powers come with being human? Hi, I'm Mike Mason. This is St. Joe Society podcast. The St. Joe Society is a Catholic lay apostolate devoted to help men order all things to Christ by growing strong in mind, body, and spirit. If you'd like to learn more about our work, you can check us out online at stjosephsociety.org. This is the Intro to Moral Theology, episode 6. All right, fellas, last week we discussed the nature of man. Okay, so we tried to answer the question, what is man? And we talked about the fact that man has a soul and has a body. Then we talked about what it means to be made in the image of God. And we talked about this image of God. We can actually make progress in it through the natural image of God to the image of grace to the image of glory. And then I, unpacked a little bit of implications of each of those. This week, we're going to discuss 4 aspects of the human person, okay, or 4 powers that come with being human, okay, come with the soul and body, and then which virtues perfect each, okay? So the fact that we have a soul and the fact that we have a body means there's certain powers and certain appetites that come with that. So once we identify what those powers and appetites are, we then can be in a good position to say, okay, how do we perfect these or make these better to become the men God wants us to be? That's the idea. All right. So let's go ahead and just launch in. Okay, as I said before, we're a soul body composite. Man is an animal. Okay, so we have an animal body right here. What comes with that? That means we have appetites for things like food, drink, and sex. We have desires for pleasurable and good things, and then we want to stay away from bad things. And we have emotions that come with that. So because we have a body, we have appetites, desires, and emotions that come with that. Now, we are also a rational animal, as we said last week. Okay, we have a soul. Because we have a soul, what comes with that is an intellect and a will. All right, so notice here, because we have a soul, we have an intellect and a will, so we can think and choose. Because we have a body, we're going to have certain appetites and desires and emotions that come with that. To become the man God wants you to be, how much of this you have to perfect? You guessed it, the whole thing, okay? So that's what we need to talk about today. Now, to help you understand kind of our relationship in the created order, I thought we'd talk briefly about the hierarchy of being, because this is going to help you understand what powers we have and how that compares to other creatures, okay? So of all the things God created, all right, there are some things he created that are inanimate objects. Okay, these are things that have no life in them whatsoever. These are things like rocks and my cell phone and computers and clouds and stuff like that. Okay, so there are objects in this world that are inanimate, just means they're not alive. Okay, and we could lump a whole bunch of stuff in there. So in the hierarchy of being, of created beings, they're at the lowest end. Okay, well, what would be above them? Well, what would be above them are living creatures, okay, called plants. All right. Now, this is going to shock some of you, and it always, my students always think I'm saying something wrong when I say this, but I'm not. Any living thing has a soul. Any. Okay. Now, some of you guys might think I just said something heretical, but I promise I did not. If a thing is alive, it has a soul. Why would I say that? Because the soul is the principle of life. It's the thing that makes something alive. So this flesh and blood here, it's alive because I have a soul. When my soul leaves it, this flesh and blood will become inanimate. Got it? Okay. Now, when I say every living thing has a soul, I never said they have the same kind of soul. There's actually 3 kinds of souls. Okay. Plants have what's called a vegetative soul. What that means is they have a soul that has the power to take in nourishment, grow, and reproduce. So plants can do that. Okay. Plants can do that because they have a vegetative soul. Now, plants are all fine and good, but what creatures would be above a plant? Okay. Those would be animals. Animals have what's called a sensitive soul. Now, I don't mean sensitive like, they watch Hallmark, movies on the Hallmark channel and have themselves a good cry. Okay, I don't mean that. What I mean by that is an animal, because it's higher in the hierarchy of being, animals can do what plants can do. Not in the same way, but an animal can take in nourishment, grow, and reproduce. So they're like plants in that sense, but their soul has more power than just that. For an animal, they have external and internal senses. Okay, an external sense is just what it sounds like. It's an ability to see, to hear, smell, taste, and touch. So they can interact with the world around them. Okay, so your dog might want you to scratch his ears or something like that. That's because he has an animal sensitive soul. The animals also have internal senses. What are internal senses? That's when all this sense information comes in to our eyes and ears and mouth and nose. Inside of us, in our brains, we can have things like common sense. We have what's called imagination. What I mean by imagination here is we can understand physical things. We have estimative power. Okay, we can make estimations on how things are going. You can judge things right in front of you. Animals can do, kind of basic math, stuff like that. We have memory, those sort of things. So when it means to have a sensitive souls, you have all the powers of the vegetative, but with the sensitive, you can interact with the outer world in a more profound way, okay, by sight, hear, taste, and touch, and then also by reflecting upon that information in the brain, okay? Make sense? Now, what would be above the animal? You guessed it, humans. Now, notice here, humans can do everything the vegetative power has. We can take in nourishment, grow and reproduce. So all things being equal, we can do that. We also have all the powers animals have. We have sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, all that stuff. We can take that in. We can reflect upon it, right? We have imaginations and common sense and what's called cogitative power, but it's estimative power by judging things, particular things in our experience. We have memories. We have all that sort of stuff. So we have that in common with animals. What can we do that the animals can't? Well, the title, the name of our soul gives it away. We have a rational soul. We have the ability to think abstractly. Okay. So human beings, we have the ability not just to think about objects in the here and now. We have the ability to step back and think about abstract concepts. Okay. We can do math. We have high level language, right? We can speak in high level language. We can think about universal concepts, but like, what is the nature of justice and what does it mean to be good? We can do all that sort of stuff. We can do theology like we're doing right now. We have that power because we are rational. Okay. Now, our rationality can be theoretical. That's all stuff I was talking about, philosophy and physics and stuff like that. It can also be practical, like making good moral choices or building a kitchen table, right? Or putting your deck together. So our rational soul can do theoretical work or practical. And that comes naturally to us because that's what we are. Make sense? Now, above us, of course, would be angels. Angels, okay, they're above us, not because they can they have sensitive souls or things like that. They have rational souls without the hindrances of the body. Now, that would take us, I would love to talk about that. That would take us down a rabbit hole that I'm not going to chase down, but possibly in the future, we could maybe do a unit or two on the nature of angels, which would be kind of cool stuff. But I'm going to postpone that in the future. But angels are above us because, and if you, in very simplistic terms, they're smarter than we are. They don't have to sleep. They don't have to eat. They never get tired because they don't have these bodies. Our bodies drag our souls down. They don't have that. So they have our rationality, but like, the dumbest angel's like the smartest human being that ever existed. Okay. Because their bodies don't lay them down. All right. That's the hierarchy. The reason why I wanted to walk through that is it's just cool to know and reflect upon, but also you have to understand what powers a human being has and how we're related to other created creatures, other parts of creation, so we can know how to perfect ourselves. Okay. Which is what the kind of meat of our talk is today. These four aspects of the human person. Okay. This fact that we have an intellect and a will that comes with our rational soul. So we can think and we can choose. Okay. The fact that we have a body means we have certain appetites. We have an appetite for pleasurable goods and we have appetites for difficult goods. All right. So we have an intellect. We have the ability to think. We have a will, which is the ability to choose. We have an appetite for pleasure of food, drink, and sex, which is obvious because we all have it. But that's not the only kinds of goods we are attracted to. We're also attracted to difficult goods. Difficult goods would be things like our desire to listen to this podcast. Okay. Now, maybe you guys find this podcast somewhat interesting. Maybe you find it entertaining or pleasurable. Maybe not. But you might, hopefully, you find it informative. Maybe it's a little challenging at times. But maybe when you listen to it, you think to yourself, like, I'd really like to learn this stuff because I think it could help out a lot. That is that desire for difficult goods. So whenever you're trying to do something challenging, like learn some theology, or master some skill, or bench press 300 pounds, or run a 7-minute mile, or whatever, those are the desire for arduous goods. Okay, so these appetites for difficult and pleasurable goods come with the fact that we have bodies. Okay, and then the fact that we have an intellect and will comes with the fact that we have a soul. And obviously, as I talked about before, since we're soul body composite, there's a lot of give and take between the two. So we don't want to like completely separate these appetites and things, because that wouldn't be accurate. But they are distinct. Okay. Now, you may have heard of the cardinal virtues before, which we're going to talk about at length in the future. But when the church, when you read, when you're sitting in mass and the priest tells you to challenge you to become virtuous, when you read Catholic literature and they tell you to become virtuous, what the virtues do is they perfect these 4 powers. Okay. So there are virtues that perfect our intellects. They make our intellects work the way they're supposed to. There is a virtue that perfects the will. There's a virtue that perfects your desire for pleasure. And there's a virtue that perfects your desire for difficult goods. You need these virtues because God has a plan for us, right? He made us with a nature, and he has a plan, and he has a future for us. He wants us to become the men he wanted us to be. Well, what does that mean? That means our minds, our wills, and our appetites for difficult and pleasurable goods get perfected. Okay? That's what the moral life's all about. And as you start to acquire these perfections, and your intellect starts working better, and your will and your appetites are under control, when that happens, you start to flourish. When you start to flourish, you start to become happy, and that's how the moral life plays out. Okay? So hopefully you guys are seeing how, if the goal of the moral life is to be happy, which we'll talk about a lot more next month, you have to know kind of what we are to know how to understand happiness truly. Okay. If somebody said, well, happiness is just making lots of money and chasing women around and drinking booze and going on vacation all the time. Well, at this point, you guys should realize, well, that's not a proper happy life for a human. Maybe a dog would want a life of pure pleasure, but that's not a human thing. Why? Because our desire for pleasure has to be tempered, okay? Because there's other goods of the intellect and the will and things that also need to be perfected. So you'll notice how we already are starting to understand how the happiness or the good life can't be equated with something like pleasure, or it can't be equated with something like chasing honors and glory and stuff by doing difficult things. It can't be equated with doing philosophy and things. Why? Because the whole person needs to be perfected, not just parts, okay? That's where we're headed. All right. So when the intellect's perfected, you can perfect the mind's ability to just think. You can also perfect the mind's ability to make good choices. Okay. So this is what's the difference between what's called the speculative and practical intellect. And there's virtues that perfect both. The virtue of the 4 cardinal virtues that perfect the intellect is what's called prudence, how to make good decisions, which we'll talk about at length in the future. The will, what's the will want? The will wants what's good. Okay, the will wants to chase after things that are going to help you be better. Well, that needs to be perfected, because you can imagine how that could get out of control. So you need to get the will so that it pursues good, but it also takes into consideration what you owe other people. That's called justice. So justice perfects the will so that as you pursue goods, you not only pursue your own goods, but also the goods for your neighbor. Okay, so that's justice. Our desire for pleasurable goods, things like food, drink, and sex, that needs to be perfected through temperance. So as we perfect that, you chase after proper pleasures at the proper time. And then finally, the pursuit of difficult goods is by fortitude. And fortitude means you have the courage to do difficult things. You have the courage to face your fears so that you can acquire difficult goods. That's the idea. So now that we have that groundwork laid, as we practice our rule of life, as we get further in this moral theology, we're going to keep unpacking the implications of the reflection today and help you guys become the men God wants you to be. So we'll leave it there. Hope you guys have an awesome week. God bless.